Jasmine Crockett slammed the door to her car and glanced at the dimly lit supermarket parking lot. She was late, as usual, but she was used to the rush. There was always some last-minute phone call, something urgent. But tonight, something stopped her in her tracks. It was a gray Honda Civic parked at the far end of the lot, tucked behind a cart return. The car was old, dented, and had that look of something trying to blend in, to hide. She noticed the fogged-up windows immediately. Someone was inside, but something didn't feel right about it. Jasmine's instincts were sharp. She always listened to them. Something was pulling her closer, like a magnet. There was no real reason to think this was anything serious, but she found herself walking toward the car anyway, her eyes darting from side to side as she scanned the area. As she got closer, she could make out the faint silhouette of a woman in the driver's seat, her face drawn tight with exhaustion. There was something in the way she sat, hunched over like the weight of the world had crushed her. The baby in her lap barely moved, and Jasmine's gut twisted with a sickening sense of urgency. Without thinking, Jasmine knocked on the window. The woman inside flinched, her eyes flashing wide with fear, but she didn't move to roll the window down. Jasmine didn't wait. She bent down and knocked again, harder this time. "You okay in there?" she asked, her voice cutting through the cold night air. It wasn't a question, it was a command. Jasmine had no time for games, not with the baby in that car. The woman inside hesitated, then rolled the window down just a few inches. Her eyes flickered with disbelief before she spoke, her voice flat and defensive. "We're fine." "I'm fine," she muttered, the words barely hanging on to her dry lips. Jasmine took a moment, studying her face. The woman was too young to be carrying all that weariness. Her skin was a shade of brown that made her seem even more invisible in the night, like she was blending into the shadows, trying to hide from everyone. But Jasmine saw her, every detail, every ounce of desperation. The baby, nestled in her arms, looked too still, too weak to even be asleep. His tiny face was a shade of pale yellow, his lips cracked, and his body slumped against the woman's chest like he didn't have the strength to hold himself upright. Jasmine didn't hesitate. She took a step closer, feeling the raw tension building between them. "That doesn't look fine," she said, her voice lower now, more concerned but firm. "Is your baby okay?" The woman stiffened, clutching the child tighter, almost defensively. "We're fine, I told you," she repeated. But the words were weak, hollow, like she was trying to convince herself. Jasmine could hear the lie, could feel the lie hanging in the air between them. "He doesn't look fine," Jasmine said again, her tone sharpening with authority. "He needs water. Food. You don't need to lie to me." She watched the woman's shoulders sag, the walls cracking just a little. "I don't need anything," the woman finally mumbled, almost too quietly for Jasmine to hear. "I've got nothing left." Jasmine wasn't about to stand around and listen to more of this. "What's his name?" she asked, cutting through the tension. "Malik," the woman whispered, like the name itself was too heavy for her to say aloud. Jasmine couldn't stop herself from looking down at the little boy. He had to be only a year old, maybe less. His skin was pale, and his breathing was shallow, like every inhale took effort. Jasmine took another step closer. "You're not staying in this car tonight," she said, the words coming out before she could even think them through. The woman's eyes snapped up, disbelief written all over her face. "What?" she asked, her voice tight with confusion. "I said, you're not staying in this car tonight. Not with him like this. I'm going inside. I'm getting some food, some water, something to help." The woman's eyes filled with something Jasmine couldn't quite place: fear, maybe, or suspicion, but she didn't say anything. She just clutched Malik even tighter, her fingers trembling. Jasmine didn't wait. She turned and headed straight for the doors of the supermarket. She didn't even look back. She just moved fast, scanning the aisles for everything she needed. It wasn't just about bringing food or supplies. It was about doing something, anything, to make sure Malik survived the night. She grabbed water bottles, diapers, formula, snacks, fruit, wipes, everything she could carry, throwing it into her cart without a second thought. Jasmine had no idea what the woman's story was, or why she was sitting in that parking lot with her baby, but she knew one thing for sure: this wasn't just a random encounter. She wasn't going to let that child suffer. She wasn't going to let that mother spiral further down. When she came back out, the woman was still there. Raina, she'd said her name was, though Jasmine couldn't remember when she'd learned it. Raina was still sitting in the front seat, holding Malik close to her chest. Her eyes were locked on her son, her face pale and strained, like she hadn't slept in days. She didn't look up when Jasmine walked back over with the bags, her arms filled with supplies. Jasmine didn't need to say anything this time. She handed the bags over, watching as Raina's shaking hands grabbed at them. "He needs water right now." "He's dehydrated," Jasmine said, her voice steady but low. "Open it slow." Raina didn't respond right away. She just stared at the bag like she couldn't believe what was happening. But eventually, she did what Jasmine said, unscrewing the cap with trembling fingers and lifting the bottle to Malik's lips. It was slow, methodical. Every sip felt like it took forever. The baby's lips moved weakly against the bottle. Jasmine stayed close, watching but not pushing. She knew Raina wasn't used to help, wasn't used to someone caring without an agenda. Jasmine gave her space. A few minutes passed before Raina spoke, her voice soft and cracked. "I used to work at a hotel," she said, barely above a whisper. "I had a life. I had a job. I thought I was doing okay. But then one day the manager asked me to do something for him. Something I couldn't do. I told him no, and he fired me. Just like that. Said I was out. No warning. No nothing. And after that, I couldn't pay rent. I couldn't find another job. I couldn't do it. And Malik and I ended up here. In this damn car." The words tumbled out of her like she hadn't even realized she was speaking. Jasmine just listened, her heart sinking further with each word. Raina looked down at her son, her expression cracking for a brief second. "I don't know what to do anymore," she murmured, almost to herself. "I've tried everything." "I'm not asking you to figure it all out tonight," Jasmine said, her voice low but certain. "But you're not doing this alone. You're not going back to that car. Not tonight. I've got space. I've got food. And I'm calling someone who can help. You're coming with me." Raina blinked, her face twisting with disbelief. "Why?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. "Because I'm not leaving you in this parking lot with your baby," Jasmine said, her eyes locking onto Raina's. "I don't do pity. I don't do videos for likes. I do real help, and you need it. Right now." Raina opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Instead, she just nodded. Slowly, like she wasn't sure if she could trust what was happening, but she was too tired to fight it. Jasmine didn't wait for her to change her mind. She went straight to her car and tossed the bags into the trunk. Then she returned to Raina and Malik. She helped Raina lift the baby out of the car, careful not to disturb him too much. The whole time, Raina didn't say a word. She just followed Jasmine to the car. Jasmine didn't look back as she opened the door to her car and helped Raina into the passenger seat. She had one hand on the door, one on Raina's arm, and the faint hum of the engine filled the air as she settled Malik in his carrier. The baby was still limp, but his chest rose and fell. Jasmine could hear the quiet, shallow breaths. She could feel the weight of everything hanging in the air between them, Raina's disbelief, the sharp edge of her exhaustion, and the desperation, like it was pressing into Jasmine's ribs with every inhale. The drive was tense, filled with a silence that stretched on far too long. Jasmine focused on the road, her hand steady on the wheel. She could sense Raina's eyes on her, but she didn't look over. She didn't need to. The whole thing felt unreal. Raina was still probably questioning every second of it, still wondering why someone like Jasmine, a woman who had no reason to help, no reason to care, was doing this. But Jasmine didn't need to answer that. She just needed to act. She needed to make sure Malik survived the night. As they passed the city limits and entered a quieter part of town, the streetlights began to fade, and Jasmine's mind went to work, calculating everything, what she had, what she could do, who could help. She had the means to help, but it was never enough. Raina didn't want a handout. She needed someone who could give her a foundation to stand on, someone who could show her that she wasn't invisible. Jasmine wasn't a miracle worker, but she could sure as hell offer her a starting point. When they pulled into Jasmine's neighborhood, it felt like the world had suddenly slowed down. Raina glanced around, taking in the rows of houses with manicured lawns, the quiet streets, the peaceful stillness of a place where things like this didn't happen. It was like they didn't belong here. It was like they were intruding. Jasmine parked the car in the driveway, throwing the gear into park before turning the engine off. The silence that followed felt thick, heavy. Raina didn't move at first. She just stared out the window, lost in thought. Jasmine looked over at her. "This is where you're going to be for the night," she said gently, though there was a firmness in her voice. "I'll get you both settled inside." Raina blinked a few times as if she was coming out of a trance. She finally nodded, though her eyes were still glazed, unfocused. Jasmine could see the war happening inside of her, the internal struggle, the battle between wanting to trust and not being able to. Raina was used to struggling alone. She was used to doing it all by herself. Jasmine wasn't going to let her do that anymore. They both got out of the car, and Jasmine helped Raina carry Malik up to the front door. The baby was lighter than Jasmine had expected, but there was something fragile about him. Something that made every step feel like it could break him. Raina stayed close behind, her steps slow, almost reluctant. Jasmine opened the door and led them inside, flicking on the lights to reveal the quiet interior of her home. It was simple, clean, and lived in a place that felt safe. A place that had always been a sanctuary for Jasmine. But tonight, it wasn't just hers. Raina hesitated in the doorway, her eyes scanning the room, looking for something familiar in an unfamiliar space. She wasn't used to this, having a place to stay, having someone offer her something without expecting anything in return. Jasmine moved quickly, getting Malik settled in a makeshift crib she kept in the corner for moments like this. She pulled out a fresh blanket, tucking it around him, careful not to wake him. "Do you want some water?" Jasmine asked, turning to Raina. Raina didn't respond right away. She just shook her head slowly, her expression unreadable. It wasn't until Jasmine turned away to grab the water bottle that Raina spoke. "I don't even know where to begin," she said, her voice a little more steady now. But there was a tremor there, a weakness that wasn't just physical. Jasmine paused, water bottle in hand. She could feel the tension in the room, thick like a heavy fog. There were so many things Raina needed to say, and Jasmine wasn't going to push her. Not yet. "You don't have to figure it all out right now," Jasmine replied softly. "You're here, and you've got a place to stay. That's enough for tonight. We can figure the rest out later." Raina blinked at her, her face softening just slightly. The hardness that had been there before was still there, but it was fading. Jasmine had given her something she hadn't had in a long time, hope. The silence between them stretched out again, but this time it felt a little less heavy. Jasmine set the water bottle down in front of Raina, but Raina didn't reach for it right away. She just looked at it, her eyes tracing the outline of the bottle as though she had forgotten what it was like to have something to drink. Slowly, she picked it up, unscrewed the cap, and took a small sip. "Thank you," Raina said quietly after a moment, her voice barely a whisper. "For this. For everything." Jasmine didn't respond right away. She didn't need to. She just nodded, watching as Raina took another sip, her hands still shaking slightly. Jasmine had no idea what Raina had been through, but she could see the pain behind her eyes. She could feel the weight of it. Raina had been through things Jasmine couldn't even imagine, but Jasmine wasn't here to judge. She was here to help. After a few minutes, Raina finally spoke again. "I didn't want to come here," she admitted, her voice raw, vulnerable. "I didn't want to be a burden." Jasmine glanced at her, not shocked but understanding. "You're not a burden," she said, her voice firm. "You're not the first person to need help, and you won't be the last. But it's not a weakness to ask for help. It's a strength." Raina's eyes met hers, and for the first time, Jasmine saw something new there, hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. Jasmine sat down across from Raina, watching her. The night stretched on, but the quiet was no longer uncomfortable. It was peaceful, even if just for a moment. Raina's shoulders finally relaxed, and she looked at her son, her expression softening. "He's going to be okay, isn't he?" she asked, almost pleading with the question. Jasmine nodded. "He's going to be fine," she said. "We'll make sure of it." And in that moment, Jasmine knew she wasn't just helping a mother and her child. She was giving them a chance for something more than just survival. She was offering them a path out of the darkness, and that was all she could do. But it was enough. The air in the house was thick with unspoken thoughts as Jasmine sat across from Raina, watching her as she held Malik close, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed his tiny blanket. The baby's slow, steady breaths were the only sound in the room. Jasmine wanted to say something more, something that could make Raina feel less like an outsider, less like a stranger in her own skin. But the words didn't come. Instead, Jasmine just sat there, trying to let the silence speak for itself. Raina, too, was silent, her eyes locked on her son as if he was the only thing keeping her anchored to this moment, keeping her from floating away into the fear and uncertainty that had consumed her life for so long. She looked up only briefly, her gaze locking onto Jasmine's with a quiet, grateful look that said more than words ever could. "Jasmine," Raina said suddenly, her voice low and tight, "I never thought I'd end up here. Like this. I thought I'd have it all figured out by now. I thought I'd have a job, a place to stay, a way out of all this mess. But I've been running for so long, and I can't outrun it anymore. I thought I was strong, but I'm not. I've been a failure. I've been—" She choked on the last word, her chest heaving with a sudden rush of emotion that she couldn't control. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she wiped them away angrily, as if ashamed of the weakness she felt creeping up on her. Jasmine watched her closely, her expression soft but determined. She couldn't offer the kind of easy reassurance Raina wanted. She couldn't promise that everything would be okay, that the struggles would end. But what she could offer was understanding. She could offer an anchor in the storm. Jasmine leaned forward slightly, her eyes steady on Raina's. "You're not a failure, Raina," she said firmly. "You're not a failure for being human. You're not a failure for needing help. You're not a failure for being tired. We all get tired. And you don't have to do this alone anymore." Raina looked at her then, her face still twisted in disbelief, like she couldn't believe the words that were coming out of Jasmine's mouth. She blinked, as if trying to process it, as if trying to make sense of this stranger who had walked into her life and offered her more than anyone had in years. Jasmine could see the war inside her, the part of her that wanted to reach out and accept the help, and the part of her that wanted to push it all away, to hold on to the isolation that had defined her life for so long. Jasmine's voice softened, but the conviction in it didn't waver. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Raina. You've already done enough. You're doing enough. You're not weak because you're here. You're strong for surviving everything you have." Raina looked down at Malik then, her eyes filling with a deep, painful sorrow. "I'm just trying to make sure he doesn't end up like me," Raina whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't let him live like I have. I can't let him grow up in a car. I don't know what I was thinking. I just—" Her words trailed off as the weight of everything came crashing down on her. The crushing responsibility of being a mother, of having to protect someone else when she didn't know how to protect herself. Jasmine could see it in Raina's eyes. This was the deepest fear. That her son would grow up with the same struggles, the same scars, the same brokenness that had been passed down to her. Jasmine took a deep breath, her mind spinning with the weight of the conversation, but also with something else, a surge of determination. She couldn't change Raina's past, and she couldn't undo the pain that had brought her to this point. But she could be there for her now. She could help her build something from the ashes, something solid, something real. "You're not alone, Raina," Jasmine repeated, her voice steady. "I'm here, and I won't leave. Not until we get you and Malik where you need to be. You're not a failure. You're a mother who loves her son. That's the most important thing." Raina met her eyes then, her breath shaky as she let Jasmine's words sink in. It was like a dam had broken inside of her, and for the first time in a long time, Raina allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. That the world didn't have to stay dark and heavy, that there could be light, even if it was just a sliver. Jasmine stood up, her mind racing with the next steps. She had to think practically get Raina some clothes, get Malik the medical attention he needed, find a way to get them both out of the car for good. But first, she needed to make sure Raina knew she was safe, that she had a place to stay for as long as she needed. "Stay here as long as you need," Jasmine said, her voice soft but firm. "I've got plenty of room. You don't have to worry about anything. Just focus on Malik. We'll figure the rest out together." Raina nodded slowly, still hesitant, but her shoulders relaxed a little, as if the weight of the world had been lifted, even if just for a moment. It was then that Jasmine knew this wasn't just about helping one mother and her child. This was about breaking the cycle, about showing someone that there was more to life than survival. It was about proving that no one was truly alone, no matter how lost they felt. It was about offering a lifeline to someone who had been drowning for far too long. And Jasmine was ready to be that lifeline. She wasn't going to let Raina or Malik fall through the cracks. They were going to rise together. As the night stretched on and Malik's breathing evened out, Jasmine began to plan. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she had something better a drive to make sure they didn't just survive, but thrived. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Jasmine couldn't shake the images of Raina and Malik from her mind, the way their lives seemed suspended in time, clinging to a fleeting hope. The entire city buzzed around her, but it all felt distant. Her thoughts kept returning to that cramped car, Raina's tired eyes, the way her hands gripped Malik like she could keep him safe from the world itself. It was the kind of situation that rattled Jasmine deeply, that cut through her own sense of comfort and security, demanding a response she couldn't ignore. Raina had made it clear she was not just another case. This was a mother who had been pushed to her limits, holding on by the slimmest thread. Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest as she sat back down at the table, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She didn't know what the next step was, but she knew one thing: she couldn't walk away. She wouldn't. How could she? The rawness of the situation, a mother and child trapped in a desperate fight for survival, was a truth. Jasmine knew all too well. It hit too close. "Raina," Jasmine said, her voice steady but firm, like she was trying to build a foundation from nothing. "I need you to listen. I don't care how tough things are. We're doing this together. You're not alone anymore, I swear to you. You and Malik will have the chance to rebuild." She paused, leaning forward slightly, her gaze fixed on Raina. "This is where we start. Right now." Raina's eyes flickered with something Jasmine couldn't quite place. Maybe it was disbelief. Maybe hope, barely hanging on. But the shadow of doubt was thick on her face, as if she didn't believe in the possibility of her own salvation anymore. She wasn't going to fall for empty promises, and Jasmine knew that. Raina had heard it all before, the false assurances, the well-meaning but ultimately hollow gestures. But Jasmine wasn't offering her a lifeline out of pity. She wasn't offering charity. This was a commitment. "I don't want your pity," Raina said, her voice low, cutting through the tension in the room. "I've been on my own for so long. I don't even know how to accept help. It feels wrong. Like I don't deserve it. Jasmine's chest tightened at those words. She saw the pain etched into Raina's features, the battle between pride and survival. It was a fight Jasmine had fought herself, one that made people close off to the world, build walls so high no one could ever get in. But what Raina didn't understand was that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness. It was an act of strength. It was acknowledging that even the strongest among us needed someone to lean on. "You deserve it, Raina," Jasmine said, her voice unwavering. "Not because of anything you've done, but because you're fighting for your son. That alone means you're worthy of help. You're not alone in this fight. You don't need to carry it all by yourself anymore." Raina shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her fingers tracing the edges of the empty cup in front of her. There was an internal struggle there, something deep and painful that Jasmine could only guess at. But Raina didn't open up. She couldn't. Not yet. Instead, she just looked at the floor, lost in the swirl of her thoughts, fighting the words that wanted to spill out. Jasmine understood. There were things you couldn't say right away. Things that took time to admit. Jasmine got up, moving quickly to the kitchen, the clattering of dishes filling the brief silence. When she came back, she set down a plate of food in front of Raina, who didn't even look at it at first. She just sat there, eyes wide, staring down at the food like it was a symbol of something she hadn't known she'd been missing. Something she hadn't allowed herself to receive in a long time. "Eat," Jasmine said, her tone soft but authoritative. "You've been running on empty. Let's take care of you first." Raina blinked, her lips quivering as she finally looked up, meeting Jasmine's eyes. For the first time, she didn't seem completely defeated. She didn't seem like the woman trapped in a cycle of hopelessness. There was a flicker of something else, something stronger, more resilient. A spark of life. She hesitated, then nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly. Her hand reached out for the food. She didn't speak, but in that simple action, there was an understanding. She was taking the first step. Jasmine could feel the weight lifting, just slightly, the tension easing in the room as Raina started to eat. It wasn't much, but it was enough to show that Raina was beginning to trust her. Just a little, and that was all Jasmine needed. She knew that trust couldn't be rushed, that it would take time to build, brick by brick, but it had to start somewhere. And this moment, was a beginning. "What now?" Raina asked, her voice barely above a whisper, breaking the silence between them. "What happens next?" Jasmine sat down beside her, her own mind running over the logistics of what had to happen. She wasn't a social worker, but she knew enough to start laying out a plan. Raina needed more than just a place to stay. She needed safety, stability. She needed to know that her son wouldn't be taken from her, that they wouldn't be tossed back into the streets the moment things got tough again. There were resources, shelters, government programs, people who could help. But Raina wasn't used to trusting systems like that, and Jasmine understood why. But they would make it work. "We get you out of here first," Jasmine said. "I've got contacts who can help with housing, a safe place to stay. We find you work, something stable. And we get Malik the medical care he needs, but it starts with us getting you out of that car. No more living on the edge like that." Raina's eyes flashed with hesitation again. The doubt was creeping in again, threatening to break through. What if it's all just a dead end? What if it's not enough? Jasmine reached over, putting a hand on Raina's, her grip firm and steady. What if it is enough? What if this is the beginning of a whole new chapter? "I won't promise that it's going to be easy, but I will promise you this: you're not alone in this. And together, we can figure it out." Raina finally met her eyes, really met them. The battle was still there, the fear that they might fail, but there was something else too. Something softer, a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Jasmine stood up, walking to the window and looking out at the city. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, the streets still bustling with life, but everything felt different now. The world outside was loud, chaotic, But for the first time today, Jasmine felt like there was a way forward, a real way. Not just for her, but for Raina and Malik too. Turning back toward Raina, she spoke with quiet resolve. Let's make today the start of something better. You're not just surviving anymore, you're living. And that's all we need to do right now. Raina nodded slowly, a tear slipping down her cheek. This wasn't a happy ending, not yet, but it was a beginning. And sometimes that was all you needed. Jasmine looked out the window, her fingers gripping the edge of the countertop as the distant hum of the city grew faint. It was hard to ignore the reality that hit her harder than any bill or city council meeting ever could. Raina's face had stayed in her thoughts all day, even as she kept herself busy with the endless list of responsibilities that filled every minute of her life. But nothing had prepared her for the rawness of Raina's words. The question had come from a place that wasn't just doubt, it was resignation. Jasmine wasn't sure how to fix that kind of weariness, the kind that made you believe your world would always be this way. She'd been there. Not in the same shoes, but she understood the weight of carrying everything alone, with no promise of relief in sight. Raina had no trust left to give, and Jasmine couldn't blame her. But she also knew that wasn't an excuse. She had to push through it, had to push past that invisible barrier and offer something Raina couldn't refuse. Not charity, not pity, but a real chance. She snapped herself out of the thought, taking a deep breath and making her way toward the other room. The moment Raina walked through the door earlier, Jasmine knew it was going to be different. There was no escaping that this wasn't just another homeless woman or another poor family to save. This was a woman who had a fire in her, even if it was buried under years of pain. She'd felt it in the way Raina had gripped Malik, as though he was the last thing keeping her tethered to this world. It wasn't a mother's love, it was a battle for survival. The sudden ring of her phone snapped Jasmine from her thoughts. It was a call from the shelter. She quickly answered, making sure her voice stayed calm, authoritative. As the conversation went on, her heart pounded. They had a spot for Raina and Malik, but only for tonight. There was no guarantee beyond that. Jasmine's mind raced through the list of other options, but she knew it wasn't time to panic. She couldn't afford to waste time worrying. This had to happen now. Jasmine grabbed her keys from the table and went to the door. Glancing back at Raina, she was standing at the counter, quietly gathering what few belongings she had left. Jasmine could see the hesitation in her eyes, the way she couldn't quite bring herself to trust. It was more than fear. It was the resignation of someone who'd fought so long for so little that trust seemed like an illusion. "Raina," Jasmine's voice was firm as she approached. "We're leaving now. You're not staying in that car another night." Raina didn't respond immediately. Instead, she just looked down at her son. The way she held him, clutching him tightly to her chest, told Jasmine everything she needed to know. She was afraid. She was terrified of letting go of what little she had. But Jasmine couldn't let her stay in this state, trapped by fear, by uncertainty. "We're getting you out of here," Jasmine repeated, moving closer. "There's no question about it. You're not doing this alone anymore." Raina's hand trembled slightly, and Jasmine saw the way she swallowed hard, as if the simple act of believing was a struggle. "I don't know what to believe anymore," Raina said, her voice barely a whisper. "I know you don't," Jasmine said. "But that's why we're doing this together. I'm not walking away from this." Jasmine could feel the weight of the moment hanging in the air. There was no turning back now, no way to ignore what needed to happen. Raina needed to feel that her past didn't define her future. She needed to see that this wasn't just another empty promise. Raina finally nodded, though her face remained unreadable. She moved slowly, packing the last of her things into a bag. Jasmine stood there, watching her for a moment, unsure whether this would be the moment Raina finally broke through, or if it would all fall apart. But she couldn't stop now. She'd come this far. She had to finish what she'd started. "We need to go," Jasmine urged, glancing at the clock. The shelter had offered help for the night, but they wouldn't wait forever. Raina finally finished gathering her things and slowly made her way toward the door. Jasmine led the way, stepping outside into the cool evening. The city was alive around them, but everything felt distant. The weight of what she had just promised Raina, what she had promised herself, hung like a heavy fog. But there was no turning back now. As they walked down the stairs, Jasmine couldn't help but notice the way Raina looked at the street. It wasn't the wide-eyed confusion of someone who had never been outside their own world. It was the hard, resigned gaze of someone who had seen too much, who knew that this world wasn't kind to people like her. Jasmine could feel the tension in Raina's movements as she walked beside her, Malik still wrapped in her arms. There were so many things Jasmine wanted to say, but nothing felt right. The only thing that mattered now was getting them to safety, keeping them from that next bad decision, from slipping back into the life they'd both known. As they neared the shelter, Jasmine kept her focus forward, trying to block out the noise, the distractions. When they finally arrived, the staff greeted them with open arms, leading them inside. Jasmine stayed close, watching as Raina hesitated, looking around at the clean floors, the other families who were already settling in. Raina didn't speak as they were led to a room, but Jasmine could see the way her body relaxed just a little as they stepped inside. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. And it was a hell of a lot more than she'd had just hours before. Raina finally sat down on the edge of the bed, still holding Malik tightly. Her eyes were wide, her thoughts distant. "I don't know what to say," Raina admitted, looking at Jasmine. Her voice cracked. "You don't have to say anything," Jasmine said softly. "You're here. That's enough." The silence between them wasn't awkward. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that came with shared understanding. Jasmine had done what she set out to do. She had kept her promise. But this wasn't over. It was just the beginning. Raina looked down at her son, and for the first time, Jasmine saw something in her eyes. Not hope, not yet. But something close to it. Maybe it wasn't trust, not yet. But it was the first crack in a wall that had been built for years. Jasmine gave a nod, stepping toward the door. She needed to get back to her own life, but she wasn't walking away from this. She couldn't. This was bigger than anything she had ever done before. Raina was going to be okay. They were both going to be okay.
Thank you for watching our channel Modern Stories. If you liked our video, you should subscribe for more amazing videos like this. Have a healthy and happy day. See you in the next one.